Hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my chatty weekly catch-up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading. So roughly the past and coming week, it's been an okay reading week. I finished a lot of stuff, which is great, but I am feeling some serious energy depletion right now, and that's affecting my reading a little bit. I had a rough week in terms of work and just general other stuff, nothing major, but I kind of feel like a warlock came and energy drained me right now, so that's where I'm at. So if I'm seeming like I have a lack of enthusiasm for the books, it's probably not the books, it's probably my energy level. It's below zero right now, so that's where we're at. Let us talk about the books. The first book that I read this week, I actually had been reading for quite a while, a couple months on my phone. I always have a background ebook that I don't usually bring up here regularly until I finish it, because I never know how long that's going to take, because I just pick it up a couple pages at a time. And this was perfect for that, because it is a collection of short stories that I think were originally posted to a blog. And this collection was The Voyages of Cinrak the Dapper by A.J. Fitzwater. And A.J. Fitzwater is, as far as I know, a New Zealander who is non-binary, I think. But depending on which bio you read, they describe as a various collection of fantastical creatures inhabiting a meat suit. And you can get their sense of playfulness from that. And that is true throughout this story collection. It's a series of vignettes, almost short slices of life in this pirate captain's experience, all the way from, at the beginning, Cinrak, our wonderful bow tie wearing capybara lesbian pirate captain, starts out at the orphanage, and so we see her first story, her dreaming of going away to the sea and becoming a pirate. We learn a lot more about these pirates, who are primarily actually different types of rodents, and they're so whimsical, wonderful, and they meet creatures of the sea. There's a very diverse cast, and the author, even in their introduction, does explicitly spell out the desire to tell stories of queer joy. And that's not necessarily always happy or without threat. These are really adventure-filled stories, but it is stories that don't have the typical queer trauma narrative and don't really entail any sort of homophobia, transphobia, that sort of thing. So I think this is a pretty solid expression of an accepting world. It's also a very unionized world, so very sort of plays into my love for anti-capitalist stories or collective action, and that is an interesting thing to do with a set of animal pirates. So I loved how that was woven through. I don't really want to talk too much about the individual stories. I will say, for a bit of flavor, one of my favorite stories in this is the Hirsute Pursuit, which follows our character, well, it follows the main cast, right? But the kind of focus of this is Benj, who is a trans man chinchilla. And that's very interesting to have at sea, because chinchillas are like very desertous, I guess. They do actually talk about that aspect of, well, how does he live at sea? There's also an interaction with the Fae in this particular story, where they are sort of understanding about his transness, and they get it immediately and just kind of accept it. But primarily, this Hirsute Pursuit is the desire for him to get a beard. And so there's a whole mechanism there that seems kind of like volcanic hair, but in a sort of fantastical way. And so they're chasing down this magical volcano hair kind of situation to get him a beard. It's really wonderful, very delightful. And as I said, this is a very adventurous collection of stories, but with a strong, cozy tone underlying and such a great cast of characters. So I just enjoyed it through and through. Next, let's talk about the one that I DNF'd this week. I rarely DNF, but I definitely DNF'd And Then I Woke Up by Malcolm Devlin. This is a horror novella, so that wasn't too much of a surprise, but someone had talked about this and talked about the sort of underlying premise to it being related to propaganda. And the way they told me that made it sound like it might be something that worked, or at least I should try. And I do think that whole premise aspect was strong and really was a good reason for me to pick it up, but I just couldn't get through the horror elements really. So in this story, we are following a character who's in a psych ward, basically. We see them getting to know someone they're rooming next to that they don't really know, and that person is kind of unsettling to them. So we learn quickly that everyone in the psych ward sort of has their own horror story of when something happened. And underlying all of this, there's clearly been an outbreak in this world. We know that it seems to be some sort of zombie outbreak, right? So that's the build at the beginning of the story. And the innovation that I was talking about the story is really that it's talking about propaganda and the way that narrative shapes our view of the world and the perspective. And I think that's really well done, how it was done as far as I got, but it was a little bit unsettling, too much for me. So I got to a point when they're in a restaurant and it kind of transitions from them being in this restaurant with all these happy families to this outbreak having happened and it being screaming and violence in this restaurant. And I could tell exactly what was going on at that point. Like, it was sort of foreshadowed subtly what was happening, and I knew and couldn't take it. So I had to stop at that point in this restaurant scene. I did skim forward to confirm my suspicions about what exactly the thing that was being executed there was, and it was indeed. So if you want to know what that was, I'll give a spoiler here. The spoiler is that, in fact, these people, there's no zombie outbreak. It's really that all these people who get the virus via news, media, whatever, they see their loved ones and they see benign people as monsters suddenly, as thinking that they are zombies. They attack and kill them, and then come to find out it's actually them who was infected, to see their family and friends that way. So for me, it was really obvious in this restaurant scene that what was happening was there were just these happy families all around and they massacred them. So I couldn't get through that. So it was too much horror for me, but I don't think there was anything actively wrong with it, just not my sort of thing. So that's it for my spoiler on that one. For the next one that I don't have a ton to say about, I've got My First Japanese Phrases, and this is a children's book by Jill Kalz and Daniele Fabbri. And I think this is a great example of both lovely art and good design in a children's book, because I'll insert some footage here, but it's kind of dense in terms of the text. But I think I read through a couple pages at a time to get through it once, and then I read through the whole thing all together in one go. And there is so much to learn in terms of the individual phrases, sort of words that you can swap in or out. There's like dotted lines for an individual word, and then the hiragana that match that as part of the phrase. So you might have something talking about the season, and it will have one season there with the dotted line underneath, and then it will give you a list further down of the other seasons. So you can swap those out at will. There are lists all through this of the numbers, of the days of the week, things like that. So those were things I haven't so far learned, or I've learned a few examples of. I did delight in finding words through this that I did actually already know. That's been fun so far in my reading. And I just think the art was lovely. It's very brightly colored. It's a little busy, maybe, but I do like the style, and I like that it doesn't have any like harsh, dark lines surrounding anything. It's kind of unoutlined. So I love the art style, and from that design perspective, I felt like it was a great way of consuming the information. For a young child, I do think this would actually be a good example of a multilingual text to pick up, because it does have sort of phonetic translation at the beginning to tell you how you sort of pronounce these certain characters. It's a really gradual progression of things through this. So I thought this was really phenomenal in terms of a children's book to learn Japanese. Really helped me. The next one I don't have too much to say about, despite the fact that it's very massive, and that is The Best of World SF, Volume 2, edited by Lavie Tidhar. It's a very chunky one. It's over 600 pages, It is one I have been slowly buddy reading with Shannon from That's So Poe. We had buddy read the first volume, and I think we both enjoyed the stories in that first volume a little more than this one. This one, for me, about a third of the stories were really stories I would pursue more from the authors. But that's a pretty good ratio in something like this, where it's an anthology that's kind of a wild smattering. I just love the project of this anthology series, though, in that it's bringing me so many new authors to read from around the world. And in this volume, Tidhar specifically mentions that he is collecting without repeating authors. So he is looking for unique new voices around the world. Many of these stories are translated, which is very exciting because it's obviously really difficult to get full-length novels translated to kind of break through. Many of these have been published before, but there were a handful of new works also included here. So that's a great mix to get. So I just love the project of this whole anthology collection. As I said, I think this was not quite as strong as the first one, just because Tidhar has a certain leaning toward certain styles of stories that I don't think work quite as much for myself or Shannon. But again, a good portion of this was authors I want to check out more of. Neon Yang had a work, I think a novelette length, longer type of novelette length, style story, Beneath the Firmament, that I really enjoyed and is one of the few of Neon Yang's works that I haven't read before. So I was very happy to get to that one. There were a number of other authors that I definitely want to check out more from. Natalia Theodoru is one that I have already since read a 2022 novelette release from as well, in addition to the story I read here. Samit Basu is someone I definitely want to read more from. K.A. Turnia is someone, I think Russian, that I haven't heard of before and I really want to check out. So there were a number of authors that this put on my radar to get to, and I think that has been the delight of going through this collection. Next one, I kind of want to do a standalone review because it's so under talked about here on BookTube, but I loved it. Definite, one of my probably favorites of the year so far is The Mountain and the Sea by Ray Naylor. This is just a beautiful book as well. This is FSG US copy. Absolutely gorgeous. And this is not sprayed. This is actually printed on. So this is such a glorious book because it's proper science fiction, really like actually grounded science in marine biology. And we're following multiple perspectives that kind of come together in the end, but the main perspective, the big overarching story here is this marine biologist who is specializing in octopus and cephalopod intelligences. There's also this sort of near future setting with AI involved and environmental type of aspects that are realistic, though a little beyond where we're at today, hopefully. And you are going through this discovery of cephalopod intelligence. The story sort of imagines what would happen if you had octopuses forming community and living longer than they normally do because they have very short lifespans. How could that build into the potential for higher sapiens, right? And I thought that was so wonderfully done. It's great to nerd out about that, and seeing the scientist character process through the challenges and the possible detriments of her discovery is so wonderful. And I just loved every aspect of it. I think it was so phenomenal. I don't think this will work for everyone because the writing style is very abrupt and to the point, I think. And all of the characters kind of talk in the same way. They were very distinct characters to me though, but in terms of dialogue, I don't think they had strong, unique voices. So that's basically the only thing that was a detractor for me at all. I loved every minute of this. I kind of couldn't put it down. This was very easy to read and I just sort of devoured it, honestly. So I will be doing a standalone review of The Mountain and the Sea very, very soon. Then last but very much not least, I read the memoir of Laura Jane Grace, and this is the lead singer of Against Me, the punk rock band. So it does have a lot of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll elements. It's split sort of though. So it has that memoir in standard text, and it also has journal entries. Laura Jane took sort of prolific journals for decades, and so we have all of those journal entries to pull from. And I loved the duality and different sides of a person that showed here because, as I said, in the memoir section, we are getting that kind of standard memoir where it's talking almost from outside of her experience growing up, her resistance and non-acceptance of authority, all the kind of normal things that lead someone to become a punk, and the lashing out, the anger and aggression toward anyone in authority, the police, getting herself into trouble and into drugs, having very unsafe sex, and just being in bad situations a lot. But it also has the glamorous side of selling out and becoming sort of a big punk star. However, through the journal entries, we're actually getting the introspection from her about how she was feeling through all of these things and the deeper seated problems about her not accepting her gender and feeling gender dysphoria. From a very young age, it's clear that she was feeling that and suppressing it and continuing to push it away. And as we get toward the end of this book, spoiler, obviously she transitions, right? But we're moving toward this end where those two do finally come together and talk about her in both of those aspects, in both the internal and the external, about what she's doing with her life and how it becomes this cohesive identity for her as Laura Jane. And I was a little bit sad because throughout this, we're almost to the very end before she is even beginning to transition. So it feels like it's the beginning of her story where we end. It made me a little sad to go through the pictures in here, and only the final picture is of her living as herself, as a woman. So that kind of did sadden me, but I think this is an important background of what was going on under the surface for her to lead her where she was, and how she was in a situation where she couldn't continue to push that aspect of herself away anymore, and doing so was really deeply harmful for her. And that became clear over her life through all the things she was kind of going through. So I loved the way that played out and the healthy sort of way it wrapped up. I loved that the narrative to this whole memoir was a journey of self-acceptance, and I love that we did find closure at the end of it, but I do really hope we get more. I want to hear more of her story going on from this. Another thing, this was kind of a turning point for me as a reader, something that evolved, I guess, in me for how I'm going to look at fiction about transness going forward, because almost every memoir that I have read, I think maybe all of them in fact, the individual writing the memoir still talks about themselves in their youth prior to transition, using often their previous name, their dead name, using their old pronouns, that sort of thing. And so I've seen that in memoirs. And yet when it comes up in fiction, it's something that not just myself, but I think a lot of people immediately feel is negative if it's done in fiction that way. And like, that's really bad. Don't dead name the character, etc. But when that's the way that it's talked about for an actual trans person discussing themselves and how they frame themselves based on what other people's perception of them was, and they can't change that was reality for themselves. I think it maybe gets into territory in fiction when we're pushing back against that or being negative about that, of something akin to pushing an author to out themselves, potentially. So I think I'm going to be more neutral toward that in fiction going forward when it's executed, because now kind of having that hindsight of having actually read quite a few memoirs from trans authors, that seems like it is a common experience and a common way of being perceived through other people's eyes and through the social pressures that were on them at the time. And so I'm interested now going forward to read things through that new lens. So that was a shifting point for me through this. I think that's mostly all of what I have to say. One of the things that was really hard for me reading this, I would say, if you are all squeamish, the level of dirtiness in this was a little too much for me. I was a little like, I could almost smell people not having washed for weeks or months. Yeah, the cleanliness aspect was really difficult to read. There is also quite a few mentions of like suicidal ideation. So for triggers, I would say that is definitely in there. There are a handful of other triggers, but I don't think anything too graphic. So really, really enjoyed this memoir. I think it was high time for me to get to it, and I'm very, very happy for the Trans Girl April readathon to have pushed me into it. So I think that is everything that I read for this week. I was not really feeling like reaching for my pile of all the stuff I have in progress last night. And so I kind of randomly started other stuff, of course. First, I started a web serial. I don't know whether I want to talk about it yet. We'll see. Web serials are very touch and go. But I read 10 chapters in just one go. I couldn't stop reading it. So I'm liking it so far. I will get a little further into it before I decide whether I want to talk about it or worth talking about it all. I also, this morning, didn't want to pick up any of my books still, but I had one on my pile that was very, very much appealing to me, and that was Peter Darling by Austin Chant. This is a trans man Peter Pan retelling. It's a reread for me, and I wanted to pick it up because I have been wanting to reread it for a long time, and yet again, Trans Girl April pushed me to put it on my TBR, so I was very happy it was there. And I also have been working on my TLS, and this is actually 2 weeks ago's edition. I started my newest one this morning as well. So this particular article that I'm on is The Explorer's Holy Grail, Burton and Speke Search for the Source of the Nile, and that is, of course, all about the River of Gods, which is a book I have read. So that is a delight, because this is the first article I've encountered in here that's actually a book I've read, and it includes a lot of summary of stuff that's covered in the book, and I think that was great. There's also some additional contextualizing information, so I like that. But even more importantly, it also is paired on the other side with another book about a river, about the Zambezi River. So it was great to see that information from a book I'd read and pair that with yet another book that was quite of interest, I think. So I've been enjoying the TLS very much. If you are someone who is just a curious person and likes to get a smattering of topics, these are not just books purely. A lot of this references books in order to talk more broadly about current events, current issues, and you're getting this whole broad smattering from fiction to nonfiction, classics, and the writers here are clearly really well versed in their topics. So whether they're a reviewer or they're actually someone who is academic in the study of whatever they're talking about, like, they are drawing from a lot of information, so they can reference multiple things, and that has been wonderful. So I'm really loving and so happy that I subscribed to the TLS. So my still reading pile, I still have a little bit to finish up in Spear Cut Through Water that is off away somewhere, and I still have these two, Byzantium and Tales from Gavagans Bar, that haven't really been moving. So these are priority to get through in May, really get some traction on, because those have been kind of languishing. And of course Babel. So my actual copy has gotten here from Blackwell's. I got the lovely UK edition and transferred over my tabs and everything. So this is nice because both the UK and US are published by Harper Voyager. So they have the exact same text, typesetting, the whole layout is exactly the same internally. But I'm very glad I got the UK edition because it's actually a little bit more heavy duty. Like the actual paper is the front has actual end papers. The US edition does not. It's just plain paper. But otherwise they're the same. So the interior is all basically identical. So that was a good find. I'm very happy I got this one though. And I think that's it for print books. For audio, I'm still slowly making my way through Oleander's Sword. Yeah, and I'm liking it, still really, really enjoying it, but I'm only like 20%. It's quite slow going. So now I will be looking forward to all the stuff I really want to get to in May, and probably will not get to most of it because I have this backlog of like probably 2,000 pages to read before I can start anything new. Or I don't have to, it's not a rule, but I would like to finish up some more stuff before I start anything new, because I'm feeling the burden of my currently reading pile right now. So yeah, we're gonna make some progress. Appropriately for Trans Girl April, and kind of unexpectedly, my launching into that, definitely had some gender nonconforming and trans elements. So I started Feel Good on Netflix. It's a series, and there are 2 seasons out now, I think. I haven't finished it yet, so I'm somewhere early into the 2nd season. But it stars Mae Martin, who's a comedian, and Charlotte Ritchie, who was also in the latest season of You. Her character is polar opposite from who she is in You, though. Wild to see that, because I did just watch the latest season of You a couple of weeks back. But it definitely has sort of disaster woman vibes. If you like Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I think you will probably like this show. It's very British Canadian disaster woman, though. And it clearly was pretty autobiographical, and you could get that sense out of it, but I didn't really know anything about Mae Martin. And toward the end of season 1, maybe early season 2, people start mentioning to Mae about being trans, and Mae is just kind of like, well, wait a minute, what? And so that's clearly not something that Mae had processed as far as the show had gone that I've watched. But I randomly decided to watch Mae's new stand-up special that came onto Netflix maybe a month ago, very recently, called SAP. Really enjoyed it. It definitely cleared up the fact that this is very autobiographical, like a lot of the elements come up as being from her life. So then I was watching and was like, something is really different. I can't tell what. And toward the end, Mae does bring up having recently started on testosterone, and I was like, oh yeah, that's so obvious. You know, it's minor difference, but it's present there. So yeah, I think that was a great one to watch, and it doesn't go heavily into the gender aspects, but that is present in discussion as a topic in the stand-up special. Very funny. I really, really laughed a lot at it. So really enjoyed both the series and the stand-up special. And rounding out with how my week was, I already said it was exhausting this week. It was a bad work week, really, really rough. Some very long days where I had to make difficult decisions this week because I had my reading for the 2022 releases because I wanted to wrap that up before the Hugos and kind of process what was at the top of my reading, and that wound up taking so much out of me after my long days, and I kind of picked and chose whether I was going to work out in the evening or do video editing. One of the nights I got through all this great editing that, not fantastic editing, but like a lot of progress toward cutting down, like just cutting out major silences and stuff. It takes a lot of time. When you're talking about a 45-minute video or a 50-minute video, it's really hard to remove all your thinking time, right? So I had gotten through that. I had tried something new to get through that more quickly, did it, and then got to combining it all kind of and getting it all together to then go through and do the minor stuff and realize that it completely didn't work. And when I tried to put it all together, it didn't happen. So I had to start completely over. So that took a lot out of me. And most of the nights I did actually wind up choosing to work out over doing editing. So most of my editing was toward the end of the week after I gained the mental fortitude to try again after that. And I did actually figure out what it was that I was trying to do. So the second try, I was able to do the thing that I wanted, and it did speed up my editing a lot. So that will be helpful in the future. But why I keep trying brand new things on really long, editing intense videos, I don't know. I need to not do that and just keep that for short videos. But it did eventually work out. So that's work and videos, and that's kind of all there was. I have been so out of the loop almost, just not paying attention to anything outside of what I have to lately, that I totally lost track of even the fact that this weekend was Independent Bookstore Day. I didn't go. I was too tired to even try to go. Like, there's only so much you can do, right? And then I also, our big charity sale that's in a gym sale type situation for secondhand books is happening this coming week, I think. It's either this coming week or next weekend. It wasn't even on my radar that it was coming up. Normally I know about that months in advance, and I've got the date all picked out, maybe time off even. I'm just so out of the loop because I'm tired right now. And it's been a lot to keep my brain together. So I think I need to take a long weekend again and just depressurize, sort of. Yeah, so I don't have very much to talk about because my life has been consumed by stressful stuff. And not even anything serious, sadly. So in terms of my recommendations, I do have quite a few. So number one is that the American Library Association released their top list of banned books. So I'm going to put that down below for you to check out. It's really interesting what makes it onto the list, and especially with so many books being discussed for bans in schools lately, I figured that the list would change a lot. There were some familiar books, some very typical ones that make it on there, and they are all very clearly the types of books that you would expect to make it on there. They're stories of marginalized identities, and that really pisses me off. So go look at the list and be pissed off and perhaps read a banned book. Next, I really enjoyed watching everyone's Women's Prize reactions, and I don't know that I want to call out any specific ones. No, I do. I kind of do. I really enjoyed Katie Books did a short, I think, and Kit the Reader, the actual full reaction to the prize announce, was fabulous. Yeah, I just really enjoyed everybody's reactions to it being so unexpected, and it was some definite surprises in the Women's Prize shortlist. As far as actual like individual booktube videos, I only have two. So the first is How Do I Pick What's Next from Kim at Middle of the Book March. I love that sort of how you process your reading, the sort of all the extra stuff we do around reading that isn't the actual reading, the mental work, if you will. I love that. And Kim's video is pretty much exactly what I do as well when I'm thinking about what to read next. I don't have necessarily like a lineup of TBR books. I have my mini shelves and mini TBRs, and I'm constantly playing Tetris with them. And that's exactly what she goes through. And finally, a newer booktuber who's very small and underrated, who should absolutely get some attention for this, Wholesome Bookworm, is going to start doing a series on Armenian books. Really interesting topic that I don't know enough about. So they started with one book review and are going to, it sounds like, do a broader review of Armenian literature and start talking about books that may be available in translation or may not be available in translation. But I am so here for hearing about that kind of stuff about world literature that I'm underexposed to. So definitely go check out that video from Wholesome Bookworm. So that is, I think, it for my weekend books. I hopefully didn't forget anything this week, but yeah, I had a really good reading week overall, other than the exhaustion. We will get back at it this coming week. I've got lots of stuff I want to narrow down and clear the shelves of coming into May for a fresh start. So hopefully my reading will go quickly. Thanks so much for watching. Planted seeds from about a week and a half ago for catgrass and catnip. And the catgrass someone has been eating. And the catnip is slowly but surely, it's not looking super healthy, but they're hanging in there. Rue is in stealth mode behind the blanket, and Gumbo is prepared to pounce. Gumbo, you look so uncomfortable. You're trying to be by your bro, huh? Hey, Rue. He's not moving. Is the world terrible? Yeah, you live in your cat cave sometime because the world sucks. I completely understand. Ripley. She loves helping with laundry. Such a great assistant. Huh. Hey, bud.